A fragile peace deal hangs in the balance. US Vice President J.D. Vance lands in the Holy Land. And what does it really mean to stand in these days? Stay tuned for all this and more in this week's edition of Israel Matters. I'm your host, Stephen Briggs. Well, today we will be looking at what's been happening in Israel this past week, a week of fragile peace, renewed hope, and deep reflection for all who care about God's purposes for his people and his land. And then in the second half of our time together, we'll open up the scriptures as we always do for a word study on the Hebrew concept of standing, amad, and what it means for us as believers to stand and keep standing in these uncertain days. It may seem like an ordinary word, but it is hugely important theme across the breadth of Scripture. It's a hugely important theme across the breadth of Scriptures. Well, let's begin with the headlines. This has been a week of both celebration and concern across Israel. After 2 long years of captivity, all 20 remaining living hostages held by Hamas were released earlier this week as a part of a US-brokered ceasefire. Families have been reunited, prayers have been answered, and the images of those reunions brought tears across Israel and indeed the world. It's a tangible reminder that even in the darkest conflicts, God still hears the cries of his people. Some of these freed hostages have even now left the hospitals that initially received them and have returned to their communities around Israel. The ceasefire, which took effect around October 11th, has temporarily silenced large-scale fighting. Israeli forces have withdrawn from some areas of Gaza, and some humanitarian groups have begun re-entering to deliver aid. Yet, the situation remains fragile. On Saturday, October 19th, Israeli aircraft again struck militant positions in southern Gaza, citing a defensive action, a response as a result of a breach of the ceasefire. And the ceasefire holds on paper, but tensions are running high and will continue to do so. Meanwhile, the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza remains closed. Israel says it will reopen only once Hamas returns the remains of hostages who perished in captivity. At the time of this recording, the bodies of 15 hostages of blessed memory have yet to be returned. International mediators, including the United States and Egypt, continue to work behind the scenes to keep the truce alive. US Vice President J.D. Vance arrived in Israel early this week and stated if Hamas doesn't comply with the deal, very bad things are going to happen. Vice President Vance said in Jerusalem on day one of his multi-day visit, "Our warning to Hamas is very straightforward," he continued. The terms of the 20-point plan that the president put out there are very clear. Hamas has to disarm. If Hamas doesn't cooperate, then as the president of the United States has said, Hamas is going to be obliterated. But I'm not going to do what the president of the United States has thus far refused to do, which is put an explicit deadline on it, because a lot of this stuff is difficult. A lot of this stuff is unpredictable. All Israel News reports that Vance noted that we're only 1 week into the execution of the president's peace plan and that it is going better than expected. However, Vance acknowledged that it will be messy and will need time to succeed. Vance also conceded that Israel and our Gulf Arab friends are impatient with Hamas because they aren't complying fully with the deal. But Vance counseled patience and reiterated the US commitment to make sure the terrorists in Gaza are utterly destroyed if they won't peacefully stand down. Indonesia has offered to send 20,000 troops to participate in the ISF. We'll come on to that a little bit later on in the show. Other Muslim countries are expected to contribute troops as well. And what Netanyahu and his colleagues absolutely do not want to see is to see the Turkish or Qatari forces in Gaza, since these are two governments that have supported Hamas over the years and host Hamas leaders in their countries. On this important point, Vance has worked to reassure Israeli leaders. We're not going to force anything on our Israeli friends when it comes to foreign troops on their soil, but we do think there's a constructive role for the Turks to play. And frankly, they've already played a very constructive role, Vance said. Obviously, Israel needs to be very careful who enters Gaza. US President Donald Trump claimed that countries in the Middle East expressed their interest in militarily entering Gaza to straighten out Hamas. In a Tuesday Truth Social post, numerous of our now great allies in the Middle East and areas surrounding the Middle East have explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, informed me that they would welcome the opportunity at my request to go into Gaza with a heavy force and straighten out Hamas if Hamas continues to act badly in violation of their agreement with us. He wrote, I told these countries and Israel, not yet. There is still hope that Hamas will do what is right. If they do not, an end to Hamas will be fast, furious, and brutal. I would like to thank all of those countries that called to help, he added. In addition, Trump thanked Indonesia for all the help they have shown and given to the Middle East and to the USA. Of course, I'd love to see Indonesia change its tune, but historically, Indonesia has been very hostile to Christians and to Israel. So, around the world, Christians have reacted in many ways, and more than 1,400 evangelical believers from over 60 nations gathered in Jerusalem during Sukkot to stand in solidarity with Israel and to pray for peace. As followers of Yeshua, we're called to pray not only for Israel's security, but also for the salvation and healing of all people in the land, Jews, Arabs, and every tribe that calls the region home. Psalm 122 verse 6 calls us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. Peace, shalom, in Scripture, means far more than the absence of war. It means wholeness, restoration, and right relationship with God and one another. So as we watch political ceasefires come and go, we look higher to the Prince of Peace himself, who alone can establish lasting reconciliation. In the coming days, Israel's leaders will debate how Gaza should be governed, and once Hamas is dismantled, aid corridors remain uncertain and reconstruction will take years. But for now, we thank God for hostages set free, and we continue to pray that this fragile period might open a door for something greater, a divine work of healing, repentance, and renewal. There is so much more to say about this peace deal and the situation on the ground in the Holy Land. Today, we're honored to speak with someone who has been living and reporting right in the center of Jerusalem, journalist Nicole Jansezian, known online as Nick Jan, and is also a dear, dear friend of my wife and I. She's lived in Jerusalem since 2001. She's a seasoned journalist and multimedia storyteller whose work has appeared in the Jerusalem Post, the Media Line, and Charisma News. She and her husband are raising their 3 children in Jerusalem. She spent more than 2 decades covering the pulse of this remarkable city, from breaking news to stories of faith and community. And my wife and I have been blessed to call Nicole and her husband friends for over 2 decades. In fact, we used to run together at some unearthly hour in the city of the great King. Nicole, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being on Israel Matters. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Steve. That was a really nice introduction. And great memories running through the streets of Jerusalem.
It's far too early o'clock in the morning, but many a mile was run. And actually, we have a confession to make. We were actually faster than Jerusalem's traffic, because getting across from one side of the city to the other was quite an ordeal when you were driving, and certainly more so in these days. But let's start right where you live. You've called Jerusalem home for over 20 years. And you have now experienced 2 full years of wartime. So what has daily life been like for you and your family during these 2 years of conflict?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's, we've gone from very difficult situations, lockdowns, etc., to then it just keeps getting worse. It's like, going from glory to glory, but instead going from bad to worse. So of course the war, October 7th was quite shocking for many people, and also to even in Jerusalem. Now I have to say, like, being in Jerusalem is probably the best place to be when something like that is happening. But even in Jerusalem, we were getting sirens and many rockets, missiles, like rockets from Hamas and missiles from, when Hezbollah and the Houthis joined in. Of course, we were also under some kind of fire. But Jerusalem still was definitely the best place to be. It definitely impacted our lives for the first couple of weeks. And then it was on and off for the following 2 years, like whether like, for instance, Iran was like, all bets were off during, the 12-day war that we just had in June, and, no school, no nothing, everything canceled, shut down completely. But other than that, we had somewhat of a return to routine, but always living on the edge and always with a lot of uncertainty about what was going to be at any moment.
So tension, sirens, shelters, uncertainty is what I'm hearing. And you,
Mhm.
as a mother, added to that mix. How did this season shape your outlook and your journalism in particular?
Oh, it's a great question, and if I have to think about it, it's interesting, that when a siren will go off, my instinct, I have 2 instincts, one is to, protect the children, and the other is to get the story. And so you have to kind of sometimes they would lead you in different directions, so you have to choose. But, I think,
And which do
actually
you
how
choose?
it's what I have decided to do. Actually, it's funny because, somebody I forgot what somebody, asked me something about that. I said, "If you can't beat them, join them, or if you can't, do what you're supposed to do, maybe in a professional or traditional manner, just do it the way you can." And so my children have become a part of my journalism. And, if I'm doing a live, I'm not going to tell them, don't walk around or try to be quiet. I mean, you know what? Just, come say hi. So I've, incorporated my home life and my family life into the journalism. Otherwise, I'd probably not report as I would like to.
So, how does that personal experience influence the kind of stories you look for or the questions you ask in your journalism? Because, of course, that does shape how we engage with what's going on in society. Your three beautiful kids are obviously involved in the story. It's part of family life, just my kids are, But
Mhm.
how does that affect what you are doing?
Well, I think, being a parent who's also in this situation, will really add to your a different part of your observation of the story. For instance, you have empathy, you can understand. I also have a child with special needs. And so I think often of, of course, my stories here bring me in touch with other people who are in similar situations, like, let's say, like within Israel proper. But it also makes you wonder what is happening in Gaza. What are the children there going through? Surely there are Gazans who have autism or have Down syndrome or are in wheelchairs, and when they're running from bombs, how are they doing that? How are they getting to where they need to go? How is the child responding to loud noises and to constant fear? And, in Israel, I've had the opportunity, sadly, to cover a lot of the trauma and post trauma of a lot of the families, and just what they're going through, and them, being away, first of all, going through traumatic events of October 7th, and then being evacuated from your home and living in a new place, living with the uncertainty of friends or family members who were kidnapped. And it's just a ripple effect of trauma. And then, so I feel like it gives you a little bit more of awareness. If you're going through it, then yourself, then you can understand what is happening on the ground. A lot of, reporters came in for the story, and while they are extremely professional, and know what they're doing as reporters, I think the added element of being here and living it with your family will also give you perspectives of, okay, if I'm going through this, how is that family that's been evacuated to Eilat or the Dead Sea, what are they going through? And then you think also what's happening in Gaza City, and how is that family coping with it?
Yeah, it's that you mentioned trauma and the idea of PTSD, and I mean post traumatic stress disorder. Somebody explained it to me like a nation is living through present traumatic stress disorder, and it's not just
Mhm.
individuals; it's affecting kids, it's affecting grown-ups, it's affecting seniors. And but since the ceasefire, has there been any kind of noticeable change in the city's rhythm or atmosphere? What's going on now? I mean, obviously, it's a tentative ceasefire. It seems like it's being broken on both sides in that process. But Has that changed? Obviously, there was, and it's a right tension to have both joy and mourning, because this is a 2-year
Mhm.
unfolding. So, how is it now on the ground in Jerusalem and by wide implication Israel as well?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a very slow decompression. In the beginning, when they announced the ceasefire, that was on October 9th. Well, our time, October 9th. And a lot of people were like, well, I'll believe it when I see it. And then it only was enacted a couple days later. And then the hostages came home, and there was some sort of euphoria over that. But it also brought up a lot of pain that people were going through and are going through. For instance, families whose loved ones were killed and didn't make it out of or came back in body bags. Of course, we have the hostages being returned now who were killed either on October 7th or in Gaza. And so there's like very conflicting emotions. There was also the from a very just when President Trump came for the ceasefire, it was like just so many things happening in one day. I mean, you have hostages coming back, you have President Trump here, you have and the holiday as well. It was the last day of Sukkot, so you had everything happening at once. And then since then, I feel like there's a decompression, because now we're dealing with a much sadder stage, at least for Israelis, which is the bodies that are coming back. Also, Palestinians actually are getting bodies back, and reconstructing or trying to figure out even where to start over there. And there's a lot actually going on in Gaza that is also horrible right now. But so there's some kind of decompression. But right now, of course, we have the vice president here of the U.S. And so there's another sort of, not a bad tension, but I mean, the roads are closed. You hear sirens all the time going by, and you're like, what's happening? So just crazy emotions. And just to say something else about what you had mentioned about a nation in trauma, and it's not yet post trauma, it's trauma. It's so true, and it was national. And again, like, I can't imagine what the Gazan experience, the Palestinian experience will be. But for Israelis, they talk about that until there is some kind of national reckoning, either on a political level or something at the top, to then bring it down to the people, where people could say, like, I take responsibility, or it happened because of this or that. That they will be stuck in the present trauma until they need that closure to begin the healing process. So I would say we're not quite there yet, but we're a lot closer than we were 9 days ago.
So, where in that journey are we? I mean, how are people processing both relief and lingering grief? Because these things can coexist, and the Jewish people are a beautiful people for an example of that throughout history. This is not a new emotion, not a new scenario. There has been anti-Semitism throughout the ages, and there is a deep emotion that's attached to that. And obviously, you've got a whole society that has their families were devastated by the Holocaust. I mean, it's 80, 90 years ago, and the ongoing consequences of that, and the resiliency that is within Jewish people as a result. And then they've had to walk through, as a whole nation, a tragedy beyond comprehension. These two things can coexist, but I'm aware it's not a quick fix. Oh, just go and see a therapist, and walk out and you're fine. How are people processing it well, or are they kind of reacting in a negative way?
I don't know if we're going to know the answer to that question for maybe years to come. There's a couple things going on here. One thing is that there is some sort of unity that people have managed to muster during this time. Israel was very divided before October 7th. I'm not going to say it's not divided now, at least opinion wise, but it was very divided. There were a lot of protests and rallies. And then when October 7th happened, all of those differences were left, behind, and like, okay, let's deal with what we have now. And then there was a 2-year very strong effort led by the hostages' families to get their loved ones back. And so that really took a lot of mental and emotional space in the country for 2+ years until right now. Now, on the other side of the coin is that in the last few weeks, actually just in the last week, there were two suicides by survivors of the October 7th attacks or family members. And that's just now. And there have been many. I don't have the numbers, and they don't give out the numbers of the soldiers, Israeli soldiers who have committed suicide. But the numbers are up, and it's like that just goes to show you that you don't exactly ever know how this is being processed by people. I know there are organizations in the land, like Christian organizations like CBN Israel. I work for CBN Israel as in the humanitarian sector, and they have just established a resilience center, which will be there to offer therapies to people, like do an intake, see what they need. Do they need a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or what do they need to assess the need and help? And again, it's just like a drop in the bucket, because I've interviewed the head of the Israel Trauma Coalition maybe in December of 2023, and I remember she very clearly, she said there is going to be a tsunami of need in this country in the coming years. And she said it's not even going to start until after the war is over. So I don't think we even know what we're in for.
Yeah, and I mean, on the flip side of that as well, I mean, you saw a whole generation that was referred to as the TikTok generation go into becoming responsible for the very safety of a nation and
Mhm.
stepping up to the plate in the most remarkable way, but at the same time seeing the most horrific things. And again, that's stepping into that place is something that has been quite simply remarkable for a culture and for a people, the identity that's been attached to that. But the ongoing ramifications of what has been experienced and the longevity of that trauma and that experience will shape and mold the culture that is found in the Middle East on all sides of the equation. From your perspective, though, Nicole, what do you see any hope for reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians at this point, or is this just a temporary pause before another flare up, and what would that look like potentially?
Well, the age-old question, but I will say that there is. Let's put it just in the relations have gotten worse. There's been an increase in racism, in fear of the two sides, of each other. And I'm not talking about Hamas and Gaza. I'm just talking about, you know how it is in Jerusalem. You walk down the street and you're passing everybody everywhere. There's Jews and Arabs all mixed in, and it's we're not separate. Everybody's together. So there is an increase in racism. There is, heightened fear and tension between the sides. You can see it in some of the policies, even in the government. You can see it just in so many different ways. So there will probably be a lull right now between Israel and Hamas, and that's just in Gaza. But I don't know, and I don't want to predict, but who knows what's going to happen. There's also the West Bank. There's also, I mean, I'm thinking of this international coalition. We're not even at phase 2. What's going to happen with Gaza? And I don't know. There's so many questions right now.
Well, and you mentioned pre our live conversation about Indonesia and Indonesia being a key component to this. What is it about Indonesia that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I don't know exactly what's going to come, but I'll share with you like the flurry of events that occurred. As I was saying before, there was the hostage return at the same exact hour, like between the first and second round of the hostage releases on that Monday. President Trump arrived in the country, and so it was like every news outlet had probably like 400 reporters at different locations to get all of the news. And then President Trump went with Prime Minister Netanyahu to the Knesset. They had a really long meeting. Everybody's waiting for the speeches, but they had this really long meeting. And then news just started breaking that the president of Indonesia is planning to visit Israel. And I quickly had to look this up to make sure, but Israel and Indonesia do not have diplomatic relations. So why is that? How could this be? And why now? And of course, it's a Jewish holiday as well. So is he coming after? I didn't understand. And also, it's the largest Muslim nation. So then again, President Trump tweeted something or put out a statement last night on social media where he thanked everybody and that the ceasefire is going well and it's gonna stay and Hamas is gonna abide by it. And then he says at the end, and thank you to Indonesia. And I'm like, where did that come from? But I think we might be on the cusp of an expansion of the Abraham Accords, and it might include previously not mentioned before or mentioned but not a lot, not like Saudi Arabia, that perhaps Indonesia said today they want to send troops to Gaza for this international coalition. And part of JD Vance's visit here to Israel right now is to set up this international coalition that the U.S. is going to run, but it's going to be comprised of troops from various nations, including Indonesia. So while I do not know what's going to happen in the relations between Israelis and Palestinians, it looks like possibly other Muslim nations might be stepping up to make normalization agreements with Israel.
Which is fascinating. I mean, Indonesia is made up of 60,000 islands. It's not a small place. It's been one of the major players within Southeast Asia. And actually, it's why Singapore and Israel have such close relations, is because Singapore is in a very similar situation to Israel and being surrounded by Islamic nations, surrounded by hostile nations to its delicate balance. I've had the privilege of being there a couple of times. It really is a unique region in the sense of how much cohesion there is amongst religions on this tiny little island off of the coast of Malaysia. So this is a fascinating development. And of course, Trump is doing things behind the scenes that people don't necessarily see his logic sometimes. Yep. And yet he's got a plan. What is this plan? How is it being received by Israelis and those who identify as Palestinians and others in the wider region? You've mentioned Indonesia. What about the other players?
Well, for sure, there's many opinions out there, but I'll share with you one that I think is hilarious. That the reason that Vance is here now and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is arriving tomorrow or Friday, is they call it BB-sitting. Not babysitting, that they're here to babysit Netanyahu and be like, don't break the ceasefire. I mean, I don't know how much of that is true or not. I mean, it was said, and it is funny. But so there's so many different countries involved. There is, Saudi Arabia, but will they actually be present on the ground? Because I'm not sure that they really want to. Like the moderate Muslim nations, let's say, like, I don't know why we're calling Saudi Arabia moderate these days, but they're falling into the moderate camp. Also, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, like in the beginning, they really were like, we thought it was going to be them, but it's looking like. And so we've got to keep an eye on this international coalition. The ones that have the most skin in the game right now are Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. And, that's like Qatar and Turkey, Muslim Brotherhood. They have Hamas living in their countries, and everybody wonders, is Qatar an enemy or a friend? And it's has not been clear, I would say, because Israel is even still working with Qatar in some way. So it'll just be interesting to see which way the coalition goes. Is it going to go the direction of the Muslim Brotherhood and more pro Hamas? Will they then rearm Hamas? And Israel said, I saw a few statements before we came on the air, but I did see a few statements that Israel is saying that they oppose any Turkish presence in the Gaza Strip. So, I don't know if that will actually um, be I don't know, because Trump does like Turkey at the moment, so he is the one who wants them there. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shapes up.
Yeah, I digress a little bit, but the UAE just announced that they have bought land in Herzliya for their embassy. I don't know if you're aware of that. That was news today. And again, that's another interesting thing. So here we have United Arab Emirates buying land with the distinct purpose of putting their embassy in Israel. I
Well,
mean, a few years ago, this wouldn't have even been on the table. So let me go direct with you. Do you think Trump's plan is a good one? And which parts of the plan do you see as being realistic, and which is more, let's put it in Trump terminology, more symbolic or aspirational for him, what he is desiring?
well, first of all, let's see the plan. I mean,
Yep.
has anybody seen the plan? We're all speculating. We all think, we're pretty much clear on phase one because there's phase one, then there's phase two, and phase two is the the big catch. What's going to happen? Like, will Hamas actually give up arms? They say no way, we're not giving up our arms. Hamas is totally reasserting itself in the Gaza Strip. They are. Uh, they they are in power in the Gaza Strip. They still have 20,000 fighters. They still have hundreds of rockets and missiles. They're still there. So are they going to give up their arms? Very hard to believe that they'll do that without a fight. But again, we're only in phase one. It's just but right now we're down to 13 Israeli hostages, and among them there's two foreigners, I think, and Palestinian prisoners. And Israel has withdrawn to the yellow line that has been defined in Gaza. But what happens after that? What is phase two? Phase two is the big one. Not only Hamas disarming, it's who runs Gaza. Is it, remember a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, President Trump himself put out a video of the Gaza Riviera.
Yeah.
So an AI generated video. It was kind of funny, but I don't know what his plan is enough to say, and so I really can't comment. We're all actually I hear I recently even more and more reporters are saying, "Can you just tell us what the plan is?" So I really don't know what to say.
And the fact that it needs 20 points as well is an interesting one. I mean, it's like the never-ending list. It's like a Christmas list that keeps on giving, so to speak. So, but let's turn our attention for a moment beyond politics and life going
Mhm.
on in Jerusalem's neighborhoods where Jewish, Christian, Arab families live side by side. Let's talk about that human side, and how would you describe current relationships in light of what's been going on between the Jewish, Christian, Arab residents of Jerusalem specifically?
It's a lot tougher than it was 2 years ago. There's a lot of mistrust and hard, just hard feelings, and uh, there's hatred from some sides. There's just it really has. I want to say it set things back. And so it's going to take a lot for people to come back to a point of seeking unity. A lot of the Israelis that lived in the south, in the Gaza envelope, it's called. A lot of them they're very left wing politically. They were very much proponents of peace. I mean, everybody is a proponent of peace. I mean, most people are, but I mean, in the sense that they wanted peace through agreements with the Palestinians, and to give even give them a state, and so it's going to be interesting to see how their opinions have changed, because they were really driving the left wing. But from the human side, it's just, I would say, things are definitely a little bit more tense, a little bit more eggshells. You don't know really where people stand. A lot of the Christian Arabs in Jerusalem and the West Bank, they have family in Gaza. So for them, it's also very personal. Like, they're living in the country that's attacking their family. I have one friend in particular, where for whatever reason she grew up in Bethlehem and they grew up in Gaza City, and they are, finally had to flee their homes in the last few months, and they don't have anywhere to go. They can't leave. They're just part of the 1,000 Christians that live of the 2 million in Gaza. And so for her, it's just very complicated, to know even how to feel, and who hates you, and who can you trust, and it's just it's complicated matters and a lot.
Yeah, I think we're establishing that just how not straightforward this scenario is on
Yeah.
so many levels. And within the local Christian and Messianic communities, how are they being perceived right now within Israeli society?
I would say that there's maybe no change for them in terms of how they're perceived. I think it's about the same, as it was before. There, of course, with the and this is part of the complications, actually. Now that you mention it, part of the complications is that a lot of the, let's say, the Christians who are in Israeli society are Arab, Arab background, and a lot of the Messianics are Jewish. So now you've got the ones who are Jewish Israelis going to the reserves, and then you've got the Arabs saying, like, I don't know where to put myself right now. But they're the ones, all the believers, whether they're Jewish or not, are the ones who are going to have to really rise up and take the lead here, I think, and a lot of the spiritual matters going on in this country, a lot of healing that's going to be needed, and hopefully are going to lead the way.
So, are there any initiatives that you're aware of that give hope for bridge building between these two communities, or the multitude of communities that are found in Jerusalem and the wider Middle East?
Yeah, I think so. And even when you see some of the stories that have come out, victims of October 7th, even, one Druze woman who was in the South, and how, she went through the whole, October 7th, she was under attack, and really, you see when you see examples like that, I think it's just a good reminder to people that we're all in it together. And I there are good examples, of there's a lot of examples of that. Let's say there are organizations, who are, like, who have supported hostage families. There are other organizations who are trying to get, food into Gaza. Like, I'm talking Christian believing organizations. So when I see that, I see, like, I do see hope. I do see that there's a lot of outreach, and I think that's eventually going to be what it's not. We don't see the bridge connecting right now, but we do see that on both sides. We do see it being built.
So, for Christians around the world who care deeply about the Middle East and pray for peace, what would you encourage them to do or to understand? What is it that they really need to wrestle through?
Well, it's a great question, and I really pray I could answer it well. Um, because I think, we touched on, and you use the word, it's not straightforward, and or those words, and it's like it's nuanced, like the every situation here has a nuance, and I feel like there's so many situations that aren't the same, similar. I think it is so important, to look at your news sources and don't just read headlines, but really try to understand what's happening. And I think, bringing it back to what you said before, it's like about the people. And a lot of times we focus on the politics and the theologies and everything, but behind all of that, there are people that are standing on the ground that have to live these circumstances, whatever they are. So I would say dig deep and find out what these nuances are. And trust me, I've been here 24 years, and I feel like you can never fully understand this place. You will be learning every single day. So I would say just, really, when open your mind and your heart, and as you approach the situation, in learning and in understanding and in your prayers, just, look at the people and look at the nuances and the variations that we have here. It's really an amazing mosaic, and and then come see it too.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that actually really helps.
Oh, Nicole, thank you for sharing both your professional insight and your personal story. You've given us a window into what's really happening on the ground, what God might be doing in the midst of it. But before we wrap up, final question for you. If there was one message of hope or one thought you'd like to leave with our listeners as we all continue to seek true shalom in the days ahead, what would that thought be?
Well, I always say that that peace looks so impossible on paper, but just, shalom, the word shalom is peace. And I think when Jesus was called the Prince of Peace, I honestly think like that's it. Like we really just need to pray for God's peace to be revealed to this country.
And that's why it says it in the scriptures. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, they shall prosper that love you. Thanks again, Nicole. And to read more of Nicole's work, you can visit nickjan.com, where you can find links to all of her social media platforms. She's an amazing journalist. I highly recommend you follow her. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, Steve. This is great.
Great to have you. Well, as we turn our attention to looking at the biblical Hebrew word study that we want to do in today's episode is the call for us as believers to stand. There's a lot of talk these days about standing with Israel politically and strategically. It makes sense. Israel is a vital ally and partner in intelligence and defense. But as believers in Yeshua, our first and highest calling is not simply to stand with a nation. It's to stand with the Lord, to stand on his word, and to stand for his purposes. And when we stand with him, we will find ourselves standing with Israel in a true spiritual sense, aligning with God's covenant, his promises, and his redemptive plan. So what does this word stand, amad, mean? Well, the main Hebrew verb translated stand is amad, which means to stand, to remain, to endure, to be established. But it can also mean to stop, to fix, to confirm, or to take one's position. It is not a passive stance. It is not something that is just ethereal in that sense. It's to take a deliberate stand, to be firm, to be present, and to be faithful. Psalm 119, verse 90 to 91 says, "Your faithfulness continues through all generations. You establish the earth, and it stands firm. Your laws endure to this day, for all things serve you." You see, all of creation stands at attention before its creator. The universe obeys his word. And in Isaiah 48, 12 through 13, the Lord declares, "Listen to me, Jacob, Israel, whom I have called. I am he, I am the first, and I am the last. My own hand laid the foundations of the earth, and my right hand spread out the heavens. When I summon them, they all stand up together." You see, even the heavens stand when God speaks. So standing in God's presence, what does that look like? Well, standing before the Lord means reverence and readiness. When Moses encountered the burning bush, God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." That's in Exodus 3, verse 5. Throughout Scripture, the faithful are pictured as standing before God. Abraham in Genesis 18, Moses in Deuteronomy 10, the Levites in 1 Chronicles 23, Solomon in 2 Chronicles 6, Elijah in 1 Kings 19, and even the angels who stand before his throne are found in Isaiah 6. To stand in his presence is to serve, to worship, and to listen. You see, God also stands for his people. Our God not only commands us to stand, he himself stands with us and for us. In Exodus 17, verse 6, God tells Moses, "I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." In Psalm 109, verse 30 to 31, David testifies, "With my mouth I will greatly extol the Lord. In the great throng of worshippers I will praise him, for he stands at the right hand of the needy to save their lives from those who would condemn them." God is not distant. He stands beside the humble, and he rescues those in need. Even in battle, He stands as defender. Exodus 14, verse 19 through 20 says, Then the angel of God who has been traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. You see, the Lord stood between his people and their enemies. And there's a fourth application of this, and that's standing as his servants. The prophet Jeremiah heard God's promise. If you repent, I will restore you, that you may serve me. This is found in Jeremiah 15, verse 19 through 20. If you utter worthy, not worthless words, you will be my spokesman. I will make you a wall to this people, a fortified wall of bronze. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you to rescue and save you. Standing before God means being positioned for his service, restored, strengthened, and protected. King Jehoshaphat understood this when Judah faced overwhelming enemies, and in 2 Chronicles 20 verse 17 we see, You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your position, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you, Judah and Jerusalem. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, go out to face them tomorrow, and the Lord will be with you. Sometimes God calls us not to charge, but simply to stand and watch him move. The fifth thing is that his plan still stands. And this is a verse that is so often quoted in prayer meetings, but it's so important for us to recognize. Psalm 33, verse 11. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. No matter what happens in the Middle East, wars, ceasefires, elections, God's purposes stand. His covenant with Israel remains. His redemptive plan through Messiah, Yeshua, stands fast forever. And Ezekiel saw a vision of dry bones rising, an army standing again. That's Ezekiel 37, verse 10. That vision points not only to Israel's physical restoration, but to resurrection life in Messiah. There's another aspect of standing, of Amad, that's important for us to recognize, and that's that the Messiah stands for us. Isaiah 11, verse 1 and verse 10 give us this indication. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. Yeshua, the Messiah, is that branch, the one who stands as a banner of salvation for all nations. And at his return in Zechariah 14, verse 4, it says, On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. The same Messiah who stood on the Mount of Olives before his crucifixion will stand there again, this time as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. There's also a call for us to stand today. Until that day, Scripture calls us to stand firm in our faith. And here are a few times where we find the call to stand in the New Testament. Philippians 4 verse 1 reads, Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. Ephesians 6 verse 11, familiar to many of you, says, Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Galatians 5 verse 1 reads, It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Amad, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Philippians 1:27 says, Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, standing firm in the one Spirit, striding together as one for the faith of the gospel. And lastly, 1 Corinthians 16 verse 13 says, Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. See, standing firm doesn't mean being stubborn or difficult for the sake of it. It means being faithful. It means refusing to bow to fear, despair, or even compromise. So as we watch events unfold in Israel, let's remember, nations rise and fall, ceasefires hold and break, but the word of our God stands forever. We're called not just to observe history, but to stand within God's story, to take our place as witnesses of his faithfulness, intercessors for his people, and ambassadors of his coming kingdom. May we stand firm in the Lord, standing with Israel in prayer, standing for truth in a world of confusion, and standing on the solid rock, Yeshua, the Messiah. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments on today's show. Take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this episode. And you can also get information about Nick Jan there, nickjan.com. Take a moment to make sure you click that button of liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode with us. It really does help get the message of Israel Matters out further and wider. Let's stand together for biblical values, friends, and point people to the Lord and his word. Israel Matters is a listener-supported show, so if you'd like to make it possible for us to continue making content like this, please consider supporting us with a tax-deductible gift in the USA. You can find info on how to donate in the show notes below. Thank you for joining today. May the peace of God guard your hearts as you stand firm in him. Until next time, I'm Stephen Briggs, and this is Israel Matters.